Welcome back, everyone, and good to be here with you again. So I feel really joyful right now. Some of you might know actually Sandrine Dixson Decle because I had the honor of doing an interview with her for the Collective Trauma Online Summit. So I'm just going to introduce you briefly and just express my gratitude for your coming here and spending this time with us here in the midst of everything else you're holding.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, so Sandrine Dixson Decle is currently the co-president of the Club of Rome. And she comes with 30 years of European and international policy experience, business and strategy experience, with a particular focus on climate change and biodiversity loss. So she's bringing all her accumulated knowledge now to the planet. And just a few words about the Club of Rome. So the Club of Rome was created in 1968 to address the multiple crises facing humanity and the planet. Drawing on the unique collective know-how of its 100 members, notable scientists, economists, business leaders, and former politicians, the Club of Rome seeks to define comprehensive solutions to the complex, interconnected challenges of our world. And Sandrine definitely lives and breathes that tradition. So Sandrine was recognized by GreenBiz as one of the 30 most influential women across the globe driving change in the low carbon economy. Yeah, and I'm just really delighted to be here with you. I've followed a little bit your work in the past months to influence world leaders to come together at the UN Biodiversity Conference, or the UN General Assembly, actually, I believe, to sign up to the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. And also the 30 by 30 commitment to protect 30% of our land and oceans by 2030. And yeah, the whole group that you brought together of influential movers and shakers has really been able to shift something forward. And I know also that you're here with a booth called the Nature's Newsroom. And I just love to hear how this is coming home to COP26 and what the work is that you've been focusing on during this first week so far.
Thanks, Kosha. Well, first of all, it's nice to see you again after our very deep interaction last time. And there are many things that are happening here at COP that are incredibly important. First of all, yes, the nature work we've really put nature on the map at this COP. And having just also worked for the last 12 months at the UN Food System Summit as one of the key action track leads on resilience, I feel that we're starting to join the dots between the Nature Summit, which was supposed to be in China this year, so CBD COP15, which is looking at biodiversity, the UN Food System Summit, which was actually just this past September, where I was also very actively involved, and now this COP. And for someone who is truly trying to think about how we can enhance systems thinking, I feel we're starting to connect the dots. As you know, the Planetary Emergency Partnership and the plan that we actually wrote 3 years ago, where we invited you to join, that plan itself was trying to do three things. The first was to ensure that government started to declare an emergency. And it was released just before Greta hit the stage across the globe with her climate activism around emergency, which was interesting because you could see this synergy between what we had created with scientists and economists calling for governments to state that we were in a planetary emergency and the youth making the same calls. And what we said in that statement is you have feedback loops between biodiversity loss and climate change. And these systematic feedback loops are not going to get solved unless we start to have integrated solutions. So what we've been working on the last 3 years, and this is the core of the Club of Rome, right? Already 50 years ago, when the initial authors of the Limits to Growth, Donella Meadows and all of the others, Dennis Meadows, the key call was these feedback loops are going to get so intense that by the 2020s, you're going to see key tipping points. So number one, governments needed to declare an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have. But what we were noticing over the last 3 years and through our different partnerships is that to shift from declaring an emergency to putting in place a plan of action is much more difficult. So we have 1,000, I think now probably 2,000, up to 2,000 jurisdictions, local and national, who have declared an emergency across the globe, but very few who have put in place a planetary emergency plan. So that was the second key point, right? Our planetary emergency plan was giving very key actions, 10 which were around the global commons. So you mentioned one of the thinking, which is 30 by 30, which is to protect 30% of our global commons by 2030 to ensure that actually not only are they protected, but we stop cutting down the forest. We ensure that we protect our peatlands. We ensure that we're actually looking at our mangroves and all of those different bits and pieces that are the lungs of the world, but also ensuring the right ways in which we can protect ourselves as human beings on this planet. So that's those 10 different commitments are very important. The other 10 were much more structural, action-oriented. Energy system pull out of fossil energy. Ensure that we shift our subsidies from fossil energy and triple them to renewables annually. The circularity aspects, ensure that we put in place circular economies where actually we are looking at the full value chain, and even look at regenerative economies. So how can we create carbon stocks? And then the third key point was the human dimension, the way in which we protect Indigenous people's rights, but we also bring them into the fold, empower them as the stewards of the land. So that was the next really key point, right, about this planetary emergency plan that we've been pushing for the last 3 years. We've been influencing G7 statements, G20 statements, trying to integrate this in the CBD COP, in the UN Food System Summit, and ensure that we're really building resilience to future shocks and stresses. Because what happened after we released our plan? We got hit by COVID. Yeah. And for me, this is a unique moment in time where we can actually transform. We can show that human beings, for good or for bad, were forced to transform and to live their lives differently. And they did. And hence, this is the moment to do it big time. It's transformation on steroids is what I call it. And for all the right reasons. So that's kind of those are the building blocks of what we've been doing for the last 3 years. Now, come to COP. What happened here already several days ago? So I had the honor of chairing the World Leaders Summit on Tuesday. I was with President Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson and His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, of course, mostly men, because they're all heads of state.
I'm sure they were very happy to have you amongst them.
Well, I think they were, because I was the token woman. But no, there were a few others out there as well. But you know, the president of the Congo and so many others, Colombia and Costa Rica, etc., all coming together behind this huge pledge. 100 governments, including Russia, including Brazil, including China, and the United States and the others, coming together behind the halting of deforestation by 2030. So tick my global commons call. If it's real and material, we've just got ourselves the lungs of the world back, if they're able to do it. Now, of course, you cannot rebuild so fast. And of course, we've already lost and created a lot of pain for Indigenous people, for species, etc. But this is key.
You know, it's wonderful just to come in briefly and then, you know, to hear the enthusiasm and the belief in your voice when you speak about it. You know, and when I read about, you know, where people say, oh, this kind of agreement has been made before, we're not able to implement, just the tiredness of many people.
Yeah.
But to hear you come from the actual negotiations and the actual conversations with a sense of hope and clarity that this has a chance of being realized is uplifting. So
we need to hold
good
them
to hear that.
accountable. We
Yeah.
need to hold them accountable. But what the difference between what was done before, because of course I went on stage knowing full well that I was going to get slammed with, is this real? 40 nations compared to 100 nations.
Okay.
Okay. 40
Okay.
smaller nations compared to all the big nations.
Okay.
Small amount of money compared to 19.2 billion, which is not huge again. We need much more.
Not compared to the 130 trillion that
That
business is
we
one, you know,
exactly,
the
but it's
investment
still
promises,
a
but
mix
yeah.
of public sector, private sector
Yeah.
coming together.
Yeah.
Now, why is it materially different as well? Commodities. So some of the largest commodity traders vouching to pull out of any commodities that are creating deforestation. That's huge. We're going to start to get signals in the market that no, we're not going to have coffee coming from plantations that are creating deforestation, or we're not going to have cocoa coming from plantations that are creating
I just see
deforestation.
the sticker of IKEA here, so I hope they're involved.
So
Yeah.
IKEA is involved. And by the way, IKEA, I'm going to a reception this evening by IKEA. I've had conversations with
Yeah.
Jesper Bodden, who is the CEO of IKEA. I was with the IKEA Foundation this weekend. They're doing a huge amount.
They are.
They are
right?
the ones
Yeah.
that are thinking through a totally new model. They know that they can't continue to have this wastage model of build, get rid of,
Cheap stuff,
cheap
yeah.
stuff. No, they're going to
Yeah.
create a servicing economy. They're going to totally shift their business model into, you come into IKEA, you pick the living room that you want. We give it to you. You pay a premium for it. When you're finished with it, you bring it back and you get another living room.
Yeah.
Okay. And we will recycle and ensure that it's fully circular and regenerative
Yeah.
where we can.
Yeah.
So these kind of models are getting exciting. Again, if they're material, if they're large scale, if they hit the scope. I think the other really key important part within this deal that we had on deforestation is the recognition. And I was just with Mark Carney this morning, you know, who's the special ambassador on finance to the UN Sec Gen. He is the governor, was the governor actually of the Bank of England. Really one of the instrumental first kind of thinking outside of the box in the establishment. And he and I were having a conversation around how do you make this material? How do we stop from money going straight to government and coming down to people? Because I also just came from a mangrove session that was held by Friendship in Bangladesh that wants this to be material. So how do you do that? And that's where this commitment is so interesting. First time where it's guaranteed funding for the indigenous people, guaranteed funding for the stewards of the land. Now we need to ensure that we put in place the mechanisms so that that money does truly go to where it needs to go.
And also that it doesn't create conflict in the community, which is
Absolutely.
what we've watched so often
Absolutely.
in the work we do. So it's very complex. Money is a complex mechanism and a very powerful mechanism. And we need to, break that open, how it can actually bring life energy back.
Well, you know, and that's the interesting point, because you asked me what else I've been doing here. And the other big part of our work, of course, is the shift within the economic paradigm, the continuous economic paradigm that is based on short-term profiteering, that is based on GDP growth, rather than placing a value on what matters, whether it be natural capital or human capital. And we had a beautiful event on Wednesday, and I was so heartened to hear that this event, first of all, it was full and people were knocking at the door to try to get in. But secondly, Finance Day was the one that was most watched on Wednesday, and then ours was second. which is
Wow.
kind of interesting.
Yes.
And our session was watched by thousands of people across the globe who wanted to better understand how can you truly put in place donut economic thinking or well-being economic thinking? What does that look like on the ground? How can you translate that? We also had our brothers from Plum Village in France who were there leading us through a real meditation, both in the
yes.
opening, in the middle, and in the closing.
Ah,
And you could see this synergetic development of, hold on, if I'm more conscious and I think about materially what I consume, I can start to shift my life. But then on top of it, I can engage in an economy that is truly changing and looking at broader well-being, which is the work that the Club of Rome has been doing for so long. But now through a big project that we're launching for the 50th anniversary of the Club of Rome, which is next year, and the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, we are bringing in the pluralistic element of these different economic models, and we're creating alternative futures. We will be engaging with policymakers and people on the ground through citizen assemblies, offering these, because what people can't visualize, they won't know, is actually that incredible new way that we can live our lives. If we continue to tell them that we have to stop this and it's about sacrificing that, but instead we can say, yes, you may need to sacrifice, but look at where you're going. Where you're going is so much more beautiful. Then we can start to create some real hope.
yeah, it's incredibly inspiring just to hear you speak. And it feels to me as if you know, maybe I'll just try to put it into words and then you say whether this feels right. That you as a woman, from this feminine body that you live in, naturally push towards a more and more holistic way of approaching the suffering in the world and bringing human solution to it. And it's as if you're forging a way back. We had Pat McCabe that I had a conversation with on Monday. We had a conversation with, who was so strong about, you know, this is about humans refining their place in the hoop of life and taking up their commitment of responsibility to all other beings on this planet. And in a way, you're moving there, but you know, it's like a step by step, and bringing the world as it is into that movement, which is touching, you know. And I guess a question that I have, and that I also see in how like nature plus positive is being worded, is that there's a lot of words that are have to do with the commodification of nature. And there's a part in there that just goes against my heart, my love, my feminine way of feeling connected to earth and a part of earth. And I wonder how that is for you, and whether you see that as a bridge, or I
So
hope
it's,
that's clear.
no, it is. It's very clear. So several thoughts. I guess the first is regarding the feminine aspect. So 75% of our speakers on Wednesday were women. Whether they were in India, Africa, from here, if you look at the well-being economies, it is predominantly being led by women. You know, Finland, Iceland, New Zealand, Scotland. These are women who have decided that our economies cannot just be driven by growth, and that we need to address social and environmental factors as well as economic factors at the same time.
And this is female political leaders.
These are female political leaders.
Right.
So what I'm trying to get at here, and part of how I closed also my remarks on Wednesday, is I am a bridge builder. And I started my career in the policy realm. I then went into the energy realm, working with the oil and gas sectors across the globe. So the so-called nasties, the bad guys, putting in place sustainability and environmental management systems on very complex nuclear sites, right?
Wow.
And then moved into working for His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and then the UN, and now the Club of Rome. And the reason I bring that in is not to toot my own horn. It's just to say that I feel that my responsibility is to bring those communities together, and with some sense of consciousness. Now, how do I do that? I can only be powerful and do what I need to do, me as a person and as a human being, if I find ways to carry the voice of those that actually cannot get into those hallways of power in the same way that I can.
Right.
On Tuesday, I was with the big leaders of the world. It only took a few words in order to be able to at least get out what I felt I needed to do. Now, whether they listen or not is another question. Then that's a whole other work that needs to happen. But at least I feel that I assumed my responsibility because I was their whisperer on Tuesday, and lucky enough to be able to do that, to not just talk about my own consciousness, which sometimes I get yelled at for not thinking enough about myself by some who might be listening right now on this podcast.
So you have friends here.
I have friends who are here. Because I know that that's the role that I have to play in this game. And also to be able to be with some of the biggest industrialists in the world and call them on it. But we need to remember that all of them do have a heart. All of them do have a soul. Many of them have been hit by COVID in different ways, the loss of loved ones. And if we can tap into that consciousness and figure out ways to join the dots, then we can get more positive. When we spoke last time, I was so destroyed by what was happening in the UN and the UN Food System Summit. I really had felt they lost the plot. Here, and it's funny, speaking with the brothers of Plum Village, it's really interesting. We had quite a long conversation yesterday. And
I'm hoping to interview them next week.
Oh, you are?
So, yes,
okay.
They're on my
And you've got
list.
contacts with them. Okay, good. Because otherwise I can help with that.
Oh, yes.
They both said to me, Sandrine, the conversations we're having with you, we're having with so many others. There's this latent underlying tension, which is starting to really flower underneath the negotiations. We're not going to get everything we want, Kosha. We won't. We won't. In fact, this weekend, I was with Christiana Figueres and many other leaders, and we all agreed as we held each other that we will not get everything we want, that this will be a disappointment in some ways, that we won't be able to protect all those people that we love, the indigenous people, and bring them their rights and bring them what they deserve, or the islanders who, again, right now are dealing with that conversation with their ancestors of, do we jump ship because our island is sinking and leave our civilization, or do we go somewhere we're not wanted? Well, how do we deal with that situation? There's going to be a lot of pain before it gets better. But what we're saying is that there is this latent understanding that this is a unique moment in history, and that this COP has to put in place at least some of the deep foundational pieces for a real shift for this decisive decade. I believe that this commitment on force is going to be huge. I really do. But it's our responsibility, those of us who understand how to make it material, to put pressure on governments and others and bring in the activist voice to ensure that we truly push them to make it material. I also believe that the methane deal, which we also had, even though it lacks some support from big countries, could be also material, but again, we need to hold them accountable. The 100 billion, which was supposed to go to developing countries annually, is still a big fight. And we're hopeful again that we get, I mean, we've been talking about this since Paris. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
It is.
Yeah, I mean,
it's despicable, actually.
Yeah.
It's not just ridiculous, it's despicable.
Yeah. And just calling it reparation payments and just giving it, which is what many people are asking for, is, feels so much more the right thing to do. But
I agree with you. And again, I think but I'm hopeful that we still will get something. What I'm saying, for good or for bad, and I'm having a huge issue with this, and I've had many conversations. I had Jeff Bezos also on the panel. How do you deal with philanthropic money, huge amounts, that could really make a material difference? Some of it is being funneled too much into technology for my taste. And as you know, I grew up in Silicon Valley. And if you go to San Francisco and if you go to Santa Cruz and so many other places, you can see the poverty has increased because of these technology companies, because they think that by setting up a fund, which is a little bit their way of getting rid of the guilt, they can set up these funds rather than dealing with the situation that's right there on their doorstep. I have a hard time with that. And I've called them out on it many times. On the other hand, it's making a huge difference.
Yeah.
And if we're able to have the right conversations with some of these incredible people who have decided that they're going to give money to really make a difference, to shift not just into technology shifts, because that I don't believe is going to solve this problem.
Yeah, and we've seen some of the problems it's created already in
Yes.
Africa. The
Yes.
shift to agricultural industrialization instead of smallholder farmers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the biggest issue that we saw with the UN Food System Summit, and which was supposed to be called the People's Summit. And many people were incredibly upset that the Gates Foundation was one of the major sponsors.
Oh, I'm so glad you can speak that out. I'm still careful. Yeah, just because in Africa, so many of my friends were also getting funding from them or somehow dependent on them. And it's really hard sometimes when the money comes from somewhere to criticize clearly.
Do you know that actually Mampela Hamfele, who is my co-president and South African, said to me when I spoke to her about this, she said, Sandrine, don't forget that women are carriers of the seed. This comes back to your female point. And not only are they carriers of the seed, but my sisters in Africa now are protectors of the seed. And some of them slept with seeds under their pillows to protect the seed and to protect their crops from genetically modified strains. And the beauty there is that we do have women on the front lines that are ready to do that, to take that risk. And if they're ready to take that risk, shit, I better be ready to take that risk to also call it out. So yes, I called it out from the beginning, gave me a lot of hassle, hence why I was in such a traumatized place as well, I would say, in the spring and the summer of this year, because I felt that we were still getting caught up in all of the usual promises, and the green revolution hasn't delivered. And in fact, it's reversed the possibility of local production for local consumption. It's really created issues in many African countries.
I mean, we could really go into a conversation here.
Yes.
Because I just remember the shock, like walking into an airport in Zambia, and the huge posters on the wall is the image of a farmer sitting on a chair, watching a machine do the harvesting in a huge field of corn. It's like the image of how do I get away from the soil? How do I get away from nature?
So here's the beauty. Here's the beauty, right? So many of us were so angry with this.
Yeah.
Through the action track work, we really pushed agroecology and regenerative agriculture. If there's one thing that came out of the UN Food System Summit that many big countries tried to push down, it was that. And actually, while I was in with the world leaders, Regenerative 10, which was actually putting forward regenerative agriculture from the farmer's perspective, was launched actually this week as well. And we are a proud partner of Regen 10, and we will continue to push for farmers' rights who want to have local production for local consumption, regenerative agricultural practices over industrial practices across the globe.
I think that we've taken you over time already, and you probably need to leave, so I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
But I just feel so warmed, actually, to see the fire of passion and positivity that is running through you at the moment. And it gives me a completely different sense about what is happening at this COP. It's really beautiful to hear from you.
I don't want to give the image that everything's perfect.
No,
but
and
but
you
I
don't.
think that
but there is a movement. I mean, it's about
is.
movement,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I can feel the coalescing of positive intention. I think that's how I would word it. And I think there's a power in there. And, I also feel that more and more people can see the that positive intention growing from many places, from 50,000 people who will be protesting tomorrow as you honored the importance of what they bring, and then from people like you chairing a meeting of heads of state that brings out that forestry agreement. So thank you for the work that you do, and I look forward to continuing this conversation also in terms of resilience, personal resilience, team resilience, planetary resilience. How do we do that? And it's brilliant to be in this conversation with you over several times now that we've spoken. Thank you.
Let's see what happens next time we speak, Kosha.
Yes. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for being here with us. And we will also share this on our website, on our YouTube link, so that you can spread it around in your networks. And yeah, news from COP26. Be well, everyone. See you again later tonight.